Continuing with our nautical theme this afternoon, our next speaker is going to talk about embracing the Kraken, which I'm super stoked about. This is Ravind. He writes documentation for software companies with a strong focus on distributed systems and data storage and databases. He would write more about himself, but his cat sat upon his keyboard and disabled all the key inputs. So, take it away.
Yeah. Fun fact, my touchpad is actually not working because of the last time that my cat sat on this laptop, and I have not been able to get it to work since. I'm going to try to move through this quickly. I've got 30 slides, which gives me about 1 minute per slide. Very brief introduction. My name is Ravind Kumar. I've been a technical writer for the better part of 13 years. I could not tell you how I got here, only that I am here. I'm currently working at a company called Min.io. We do software-defined object storage. I have a background in literary journalism, not in computer science or computer science and engineering. I was actually bounced out of our CSE program. I have 2 cats, 1 spouse, and I don't get any sleep. So that gives you the short of how we got to this presentation in particular. So let's start with a definition of the Kraken. So I'm going to just crib from this very honestly perfect Google-based description. Originating in Scandinavian folklore, the Kraken is usually depicted as an aggressive cephalopod-like creature capable of destroying entire ships and dragging sailors to their doom. This talk is about the Krakens that we build ourselves in the pursuit of creating documentation. It's all of the tools, the scripts, the automations, the hooks, the APIs, scrapers, and the human work that goes between you writing something and it existing in some consumable form. And it's the journey of learning to love the process of creating these horrible, terrible monsters. So let's start with what kind of Kraken I signed up to fight. If you were here for the 1:30 talk on shipwrecks, this was mine. The main problem that we had is that this was docs that were written by engineers for engineers. There was no concept of personas, there was no concept of who are we writing for, they were just writing for themselves and that sort of internal consumption. The tooling was a in-house built Ruby tool. It's actually pretty cool that nobody wanted to maintain and nobody could maintain, which means it was already a dead end. And further development on it was unlikely because the only engineer who knew Ruby was busy. In terms of structure, some of you who like IA and things like that are going to love this. It had a completely flat hierarchy. There was no concept of L1, L2, L3. It was just a list that was built out of a GitHub folder. Therefore, it was purely alphabetical. And as I noted, it was Git-based simple Markdown, had a little bit of JavaScript in there. There was that lovely translation button in the top right-hand corner that took us to a community-run machine translation, I think, into Chinese that we had no control over and had no idea if it was accurate. Finally, in terms of general maintenance, this was driven entirely by the engineering team. So when I came on, the ask was, can you please help us with this? It's not going to work anymore. Briefly, what we're documenting, Min.io is a scalable software solution. What that means to you is that we can be deployed on really small infrastructure, like a Raspberry Pi, or very large infrastructure like thousands of nodes across multiple data centers, across multiple racks, with hundreds of thousands of drives underneath. This complexity sort of adds to the problem of documentation. We're writing for a very wide audience. You've got people who are hanging out at home doing like the little closet data center setup, and then you have really experienced tech ops and DevOps teams, and then you have people who are running tech ops and DevOps teams who have no idea what they're doing, but somehow they're responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure. So, where do we get started here? It's always with good intentions, right? For those of you who've done greenfield documentation work, whoop, there goes the mic. Yeah, I think we're good. All good monsters begin with good intentions, right? We don't start building documentation to be terrible. We don't start with the worst ideas in mind. We try to start by building a list of do's versus do nots. What do we want when we start building our documentation? What are the features that we really care about? And what are the things that have driven us crazy in the past? We bring our biases with us, right? We filter our choices of tool chains based on the things that we know, the things that we don't, what we know, what we don't know. And then we try to start with that smaller scope of features. We don't want to build out the entire world all at once. We just want to start with, like, in our minds at least, this perfect little documentation site. It exists in our imaginations, and if we just pick the right set of tools, we'll get there. And in my case, it had to be Lone Rider friendly because it was just me. And I didn't want to depend on the engineers because, again, this was a startup. There was maybe 30 of us. They had better things to do than writing documentation. And I knew at this point in time that, like, most of you or some of you should be familiar with this, where you start at the writer, you put it into something like GitHub, it goes through a tool. In my case, I like static build output. You drop it into something like Nginx, so you have a web server, and then it goes to your user. This is, I think, a fairly straightforward flow. Now, big monsters start small. Oh dear. I wasn't joking when I said they started small. Okay, what we would normally see on the screen here is a Wayback Machine of our very, very, very first. All right, we'll do it with this, without the slides for now. Eh? All right, broken touchpad. Oh, it was working earlier. This is what I get for running Linux, by the way.
Let me give you this.
Yeah, we'll just switch over. And this is for you.
Gotcha.
Now we'll go very fast. All right, screw the slides. So the very first docs that we had were very, very, very straightforward. We didn't do very much with them. We started off by just trying to add this little thing we call information architecture, right? We wanted to have some level of navigation. We wanted to actually be able to have levels of navigation at all, so we went with Sphinx. I don't know how many people know about Sphinx. It's not the most popular of tool chains. Yeah, I see like, what, 10 hands. And the fact that in the previous talk, everyone was like, wow, I really love make docs. And I'm like, wow, no one cares about Sphinx at all. It's just my ass. We started with Sphinx because we used it at there you go. Thank you, Eric. We used Sphinx because it's what we used at MongoDB. I knew it particularly well, and I was confident that I could put docs out based on Sphinx fairly quickly. I'm going to cheat and look at actually my slides, because I will give you all a guess as to how many times that I actually practiced this. That is so much higher than I actually practiced this. I'm a journalist. I ad-lib. Come on. Yeah, this will be fine. I'll just do it this way. Anyways. So we had the immediate wins, right? As you do with greenfield documentation work, you are at least able to do something better than what you had before. You solve for your immediate scope, and then, you know, you take advantage of the fact that there's community extensions. People were talking about make docs earlier, right? Tons of plugins. Whether you're using Hugo, whether you're using Antora, it doesn't really matter what your toolchain choice is. Chances are there's 100,000 plugins out there for you to use. And get to what you need to get to without you actually having to design it yourself. See, I told you, Linux. Again, this is what I get for choosing Linux. Hey, okay. This is where we are. So, one of the things I did up front early on, that again, in the theme of good intentions leading to monsters, is I decided to build something called a custom directive. For those of you who have ever built a plugin for a docs toolchain, that's basically what this is. In Sphinx, you can build out your own directives, you can build out your own roles, you pass some stuff into it, and then you get some stuff out of it. It's not too complicated at first, but our idea here was actually something I had learned at MongoDB. You could build directives for command line operations. You could build directives for all of the parameters and all of the arguments that goes into a CLI tool, pop it into code, and what you get out are these really nice anchored text outputs that can be automatically linked to, so that you don't actually have to do any link management at all. You just define your stuff and then reference it later, and then Sphinx handles all the nasty stuff of making all the links work. Which is great in greenfield docs because you're constantly moving stuff around, right? We basically redid the organization every 2 or 3 weeks. So having to do manual link management probably would have killed me. What possible downside could there be to this fantastic idea? This is just a quick example of what I'm talking about. At the top, you actually have the directive that I would have defined. So we can define our top-level command. We can define the subcommand for it. And then it would render out some text, or it would render out HTML, anchorable HTML, that I could reference using that bottom bit. And wherever I reference that, there shall be an actual link in the final HTML. Right, so I don't know what that is. I wrote it. And I wrote the next 200-something lines. And I could not tell you what in the hell it does, how in the hell it does it, or why it's successful. I can tell you that there were about 300 print line statements in there at one point in time to make it work. But this is fine. So these small pain points mask the growing toolchain monster. I'm not actually a programmer. Again, I was bounced out of our CSE program. It was not my strong point. So we were cribbing heavily from the work done by more experienced engineers. Again, I was at Mongo. They had a fantastic tooling team, and their stuff was open source. Thank you, guys. So I was able to look at that and say, okay, they figured it out, so I should be able to take from this, modify it a little bit, tweak it, poke it, and eventually I'll maybe be able to make it do what I want to do. Sphinx is Python-based. It's actually built for documenting Python projects. Its best features are around documenting Python projects. We don't have a Python project. I'm forcing it to work the way that I want it to work. And again, it's not like that's a bad thing. The Mongo docs, which are huge and get millions of views, are built on Sphinx, or they're built at least on restructured text. There's no reason we couldn't do the same. There's other people who use Sphinx for the same thing. And as I mentioned earlier, development at this point is brute force. I am abusing the print statement because I could not figure out how to make the symbol debugger work in VS Code. Because again, point number one. So building, maintaining, and modifying the toolchain was basically impossible. It wasn't actually happening. I was mostly just futzing around, making stuff work, and then saying, problem solved. Because at the end of the day, we were producing docs. We were actually making progress, and we were building out the docs to actually have things like CLI references. We'd never had that before. We had specific tutorials that were organized appropriately. And we were meeting those goals, and we all set these goals when we're doing documentation, right? We want our IA to be perfect. We want people to just find stuff. They don't have to search for it, no going through Google. We started thinking about personas for the first time. And we were, again, like this dynamic linking thing was magical because we could just move stuff around as we were testing stuff out and getting user feedback. Now, on the nautical theme, enter Kubernetes. How many of you know what Kubernetes is, by the way? Okay, most of us suffer. Kubernetes came from Google, which of course means that everyone has to use it. And it's an orchestration platform built around containerization. How many of you know what containerization is? How many of you know what a virtual machine is? Okay, yeah, a virtual container is a virtual machine. Just smaller, a little bit more simple. You don't have to install everything. You can just install this one magical container, and everything happens magically in a sandboxed environment, whatever the hell that means, in its own little virtual network. And there's promises around infrastructure as code, automated scaling, management, seamless recovery from failures, things that you could actually get with Ansible and Terraform, but because Google does it, we have to do it too. But more importantly, support for stateful apps were starting to mature a little bit more. We were seeing people actually succeed at deploying databases and data storage services into Kubernetes in a way where your data stays around. Again, we're software, we're storage, right? So if you deploy and write a bunch of data and then we throw it out the window, that's a problem. So we built something called an operator, and without getting into it too much, we effectively built rules around being able to deploy our software into your Kubernetes environment. This sounds simple. And we needed docs for this simplicity. But this isn't simple. As it turns out, Kubernetes is very different from the bare metal environment. It has very different concerns. Luckily, I have a tool for this. I can actually take the existing tool chain, what I already have, fork it, take all the existing plugins and resources and everything that I've already built, use this feature in Sphinx called InterSphinx, where I can basically just have like two separate sites that can automatically use the other site's links, or as many sites as I want. So now my references just work across domains. And every repository gets its own GitHub repository, because why not? They're free. So we have two unique sites. We got our docs.min.io/baremetal and docs.min.io/k8s. And this is great for marketing, it's great for SEO, everybody's happy, yada, yada, yada. It's fine. And for a while, there was peace in the land, right? As we build our tool chain, we usually have some level of success. Things are working, right? Until there wasn't. content synchronization is really hard. It's difficult to keep two completely different repositories in sync when you have both common infrastructure and very uncommon infrastructure. We were spending a lot of cycles, and I do mean we at this point, because now I'm adding writers to the team, and they're beginning to suffer the way that I had not intended for them to suffer, but the underlying projects are also evolving. They're changing underfoot. The release cycles are not synchronized. And so it's time for something new. We have to solve the problem that's in front of us. And what better way to do it than with scripts? Like the one over here, that uses a bash tool called csplit to split a metrics file into umpteen pieces, named, I think it's named chronologically. It's like XX00 through XX whatever, which we then have to rename on the basis that we know what the order is. It's brilliant. And it's been working for like 2 years. But what if we take it a little bit farther? What if we also included things, single sourcing for the win, but conditionally? So for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of like an if-else statement, really what it comes down to is we're just going to set some level of logical barrier. If this is true, then let's do something. So we're going to bring all the docs into a single repository, monorepo. We're going to solve the synchronization problem. We're going to share all of our content between the various platforms we support, and we're going to use conditional logic to solve the problem of being able to keep some content on one side and some content on the other side. We're going to do this in a year. We move fast. And again, we're going to write it. I'm going to write it. And I do not know what that code does. And it's fine. So this is just a quick example. I'm going to do this quickly for the sake of capturing some time. This is an actual rough example of what our Sphinx build output looks like. We pass in the Linux tag. We're going to have some restructured text, conditional on Linux, conditional on K8s. Both of them include something. First one renders out into this blurb.restructured text, which itself has an include in it because we're very clever. And we realize that sometimes you have things that are common across platforms. So we're going to include that too, but after we've conditionally included the other thing. Because it's fine. It solves the problem. This is an actual example. This exists today. We conditionally include on our index page quick starts for each of the platforms that we support. The quick start page is an entire guide on its own. It has its own includes. And it works. And we're able to create something out of that. That's fine. And we've solved it. It's good. We have working docs, again, that are platform-specific. They're contextual, right? If you go to the Kubernetes side, you get Kubernetes stuff. If you go to the Red Hat Linux side, you get Red Hat stuff. The Windows side tells you you're SOL. You should have installed Linux. What are you doing? That's not actually a joke, to be completely honest with you. Of course, problems arise, right? You have to think about maintenance. This is becoming a problem. Every single tutorial we write now has N versions. One version for every platform. We have to synchronize that, sub-included content across those platforms. Tracking the source of that content through conditionals is basically impossible. You have to look at the source code and run the tree down yourself to figure out where the hell is this thing coming from. The web of dependencies is slowing down a growing team. I can tell you right now, as a TLDR, you tune out of the rest of this. Easiest way to know you've built a docs-toolchain monster. Explain it to someone on your team. When their eyes gloss over, that's how you know. And my team's all remote, so I had to figure out how that looks in like a 240p webcam. And there's other platforms at stake. Unfortunately, as it turns out, Kubernetes is not just Kubernetes. Kubernetes is OpenShift. It's also AKS, GKS. What's the other one? AKS. And then VMware has TKG, TKGI, TK something else. Tanzu, DPP, DPS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And suddenly, we have a problem that no one could have foreseen. We also have a ton of external dependencies. I mentioned this up front. You've got scripts in your tool chains, right? Your make file has things in it. You have shell scripts that you're running. You've got pre-commit hooks, post-commit hooks, GitHub actions. And be honest, how many people have actually documented any of this stuff in any of these scripts? How many of you learned the hard way that when you put something into GitHub actions as the secret variables that get pulled into the actions, you can't look up the value later. And how many of you figured that out after a token expired and no one can figure out where it came from? Thank God for personal access tokens and wide open permissions. And then, as it so often happens in the companies that we work for, we don't just do one thing. We have other products that we have. These all need docs. And these docs only exist inside of GitHub. And we have customers who need to see these docs. And as it turns out, one of the ways that you know that you're a mature company is that your docs don't just exist in GitHub. So now we have a problem. We need more sites. And we could continue to use Sphinx. There's nothing wrong with it. It has its problems. It is a monster. We know this. We discuss it as a team. But the features that it has would work. We can make it work. We know it'll work. And we can spin up the site in a short amount of time. We know the monster. Therefore, we're comfortable with it. Or we could solve the problem. So these two products are simple in comparison. They don't need all the fancy features. We don't need list tables. We just want list tables. We don't need the directives. We don't need the roles. We can probably hack a shortcode to do the same thing. So screw it. It's time for some greenfield work. We're going to solve everything that we did wrong before, learn from the lessons of the past, and never make the same mistakes again. So we went with Hugo. So this was an early contender, actually. I'd looked at this when we first got started, and the only reason I turned away from it, again, is familiarity. I knew I could get Sphinx off the ground very, very quickly. We bring our biases with us. Markdown, honestly, most people are very comfortable with writing Markdown. Restructures text isn't that different, but it's different enough. It creates friction. And we are a Go-based shop. Hugo is based on Go. Why did I not think of this originally? Our front-end engineers also liked Hugo. They were comfortable with it. They knew how the templating languages work. They could write shortcodes on our behalf. It takes a little bit off of our team's workload. The pain points still exist. I do not like Markdown tables. The fact that I have to use BR tags to make them multi-line hurts my soul. But again, we still have to move forward. We have to get the job done, and so we start building. It's fine. So at this point, the problem is that this is what our catalog looks like. And most of these sprung into existence about 4 months ago. And we have to create docs for all of them. The choice of toolchain at this point, the choice of monster, really comes down to which ones fit the need and which ones solve the problems. We're actually going to mostly move everything to Hugo. Our original docs, our object store docs, are going to stay on Sphinx because they can. It's a painful existence when we have to make updates to those docs, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt that much. And in the end, we want to choose the right tools for every use case. So the team is large enough at this point. We have the knowledge we need. If we're going to migrate something, and we are doing a migration from one set of Sphinx docs to Hugo, we're doing it as a parallel process, so we're not blocking entirely. Or when I wrote the slide, we were doing it as a parallel process. Our CEO told us, he gave us the Bill O'Reilly, F it, do it live. So we're migrating now. And we're going to hire to fill the remaining tooling teams, because as it turns out, I am not a good programmer, and nobody on our team really wants to be. And I think this is one of those things that we can miss, is that when we don't have people to maintain our tools, we are the maintainers. We're the ones who are ultimately responsible for that. When you push a script up into GitHub, and you add a shell script, when you make a GitHub action, you are now a contributor to the eldritch creature that is your docs toolchain. And this is what we do as technical writers and technical communicators. By the way, somebody posted this to the Write the Docs Slack. Thank you. I could not find a good image for this slide, and this was it. Bless you. We build and refine our toolchains with the intent to come up with highly efficient solutions to our problems, right? We never go into these things thinking, I'm going to create something frickin' horrible. We've suffered under the own toolchains. We've already done it. We've done the hard work. We've hated what we had to do. We've complained every step of the way. I know what those Slack channels look like. I've been in them. But when we try to build, and when we enhance, and when we extend, ultimately, we're going to create something that at some point someone's going to be like, I don't want to run make. I really don't want to deal with this. It's something broke. This isn't working. I don't like this. And that is okay. We have to embrace it. And embracing the reality that whatever we build today is going to be a problem tomorrow can reduce the pressure and stress around actually just solving the damn problem. Because we have too many issues to solve and not enough time to do it in, and not enough budget to hire around. So the idea is to build better monsters. Go into it knowing that you're going to build a Kraken. And this lets you refocus the toolchain discussion. So you want to gather your requirements from your writers. This should be obvious. But we've all worked in teams, like in an earlier talk, where the toolchain is chosen for you. So if you have the choice to choose your toolchain, you should probably talk to the people who are actually going to use it. But you also have to talk and balance your expectations with the people who are going to maintain this thing. That happens to be your writers, bless you, I've been there. But it's probably not going to be all your writers. It's probably going to be a handful of folks who are going to be forced into the position of being maintainer. You want to talk to these two groups of folks and figure out how to use the power of no to constrain what you're actually trying to accomplish. There's nothing worse than uncontrolled and unconstrained scope when you're doing these sort of things. And then iterate. We don't have to solve it all up front. 80% is good enough. 70% is good enough. 60% is good enough. Set your cutoff to whatever it is that gets you to better than what you have today. We make these best effort decisions around addressing the problems of today, knowing that they're probably going to be wrong tomorrow, or now. And that's it. I think I came in just under time, maybe? I don't know. Quick credits slide. I want to actually specifically really call out the folks on Write the Docs who helped me figure out the Sphinx side of things, because again, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Especially like everybody here who's actually put a lot of effort into teaching and learning. And I want to emphasize that God, so much of building docs toolchains is depending on the work of other people who know a hell of a lot more than you and I do. And do just absolutely thankless, tireless work to build these open source tools that I think a lot of us depend on. So thanks, y'all. Couldn't have done it without you. And that's it. That's all I've got. I can't actually tell if I'm over or under time because the slides cut out earlier. And I'm under? Fantastic.
We're going to have to share. This will be fun.
Yeah.
I just have to say, I feel so seen. I don't think there's ever been a talk at Write the Docs that like stared so directly into my soul. Okay, this is not about me. So we have a number of good questions for you. First of all, your key piece of advice for people who are just beginning to build a publishing toolchain from scratch?
I think the thing first, like when we went to Hugo in particular, is we started with the POC, right? Your proof of concept. You just get something out there that works. You don't need to know how every single piece of the toolchain works. God knows I still don't know how Hugo partials and templates work. We just got enough of it working where the final output met the standards of our stakeholders, our shareholders, stakeholders, which is mostly our team, but it's also like our engineers, our CEO, our CMO, other folks. It's difficult, I think, because we want to be able to do so much. We have this idea of, we want tabs and cards, and we're going to make it a responsive design. It's like, cut the scope down a little bit more. If you can get your docs to render, and the theme meets what the marketing and design folks like, because you know they have a say, and it's hosted in a way that your users can get to, that's a victory. Start there. Tack on the other stuff later. It'll get bad, don't worry.
I feel like that was a really nice touch point back to Janine's advice about not letting perfect be the enemy of good enough. That's good advice. Yeah, sometimes we need it repeated. Do you support tech writers creating complex, custom, confusing scripts using AI that neither they nor others understand? As long as it works, do we care about the how?
I think this is going to start happening more and more whether we like it or not. Because for better or for those of us who are privileged enough to have time, we're allowed to say no, right? No, we're going to do it right because we happen to have time. But if you're a lone writer, if you're a contractor, if you've got no support within the organization and you need to get this thing out there, how you accomplish the task doesn't actually matter as much as you getting it done so that you can get that paycheck, so you can make it to your next meeting, so that you can go to the next Scrum or Agile or whatever the heck it is and tell the PM, yeah, it's done. It's not ideal, right? And again, it's one of those things, it's like you're going into it knowing that you're creating a problem for future you or future someone else. Own it. It doesn't make you a bad technical writer or a bad technical content contributor or a bad whatever you are. It makes you someone who's trying to get a job done. And that's okay.
Side note, the AI is probably better at actually commenting in the scripts than we are, because if we tell it to do it, it will actually do it. It might not be right, but the comments will be there.
No one wants the developer comments.
I'm going to set that one aside. Have you figured out how to prevent authors from making changes in your included files that might not apply everywhere that file is used?
No. It happens all the time. You can cheat with stuff like this. This is getting a little bit in the weeds, but like you can, for example, grep a file. That we do everything in the CLI. It's all docs and code, so you can use grep and like the file name and do a recursive search and see everywhere that the file is included and do the hard work of patterning out exactly where that might end up, or you could just make the change and wait for someone to complain, which is what we did because we had docs to write. It's again, it's one of those things. It's like it really depends on the situation you're in. Coming from MongoDB, I distinctly remember back in the day we got raked over the coals because there was something in the docs that was wrong, and someone noticed, and it was the kind of someone who, when they write a blog, it ends up on Hacker News, and that's not good. And as documentarians, right, we don't want to write something that's outright wrong. There is a little bit of a balance here. Like if you're actually, on that note, like if you're writing medical documentation, don't do this. It's probably not a good thing if you're writing docs for like a surgical robot and the like one blurb is off and it ends up like instead of like putting a stitch in someone, it goes like straight for the cornea or something. Like, nah, situational, contextual, what have you. But it's, again, it's like you have to define where your standard of done is. If you're in a situation where it has to be 95%, then make it 95%. Take the time to run your scripts, to check everything, to track down the entire tree, or maybe don't do single sourcing at all, because it's just not going to work for your situation. And again, choose the right tools for the job that's in front of you. Solve your problems appropriately for what your constraints and what your, I can't think of the word because I'm a writer.
There's too many.
Yeah, like you have cutoffs in these things where it's no longer okay for you to try to experiment with these things. You're the only one who can decide what that is. You are actually the authority on writing docs. And if you're in a situation, hopefully, where people respect the fact that if you come back and say, no, this is the way it's going to be, then that's the way it is.
That is actually the perfect segue into the next question, which is, having gone through all of this, would you still advocate build versus buy for a docs toolchain?
Oh, so this is a tough one. I've actually thought about this because it's not like we didn't look at CMS solutions. It's not like we didn't look at hosted solutions. I did. Because you can iterate pretty rapidly on some of these things. And it's right tool for the right job. In my case, in the case of this particular product, I had a feeling that it would need a lot of really kind of grody reference, like deep API level stuff. And there's stuff that we've never even touched. Like we're S3 API compatible. We don't actually document the full S3 API. We've never have. We've only ever pointed at AWS and said, eh. But someday, and again, I'm going to reference Mongo because I was there. At some point, people stopped going to NoSQL or PostgreSQL as their first database where they could learn everything and then come to Mongo. They started with Mongo. So we had to teach people what CRUD was, create, read, update, delete. At some point, there are people who are going to come to MinIO who do not know what S3 API is. We're going to have to teach them how this stuff works. And so I wanted to choose a tool chain where we wouldn't go into it lane and be like, well, I don't think we can write API docs with this, can we? And we've already built a lot into it, and now we have to deal with the migration. And migrations are painful. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the CMS solutions. And with all due respect to the sponsors, I think there's some really great tools out there. Whatever you choose, again, it's probably going to come back and bite you in the ass at some point. But if it solves the problem in front of you, And it solved that problem for months and months and months, or years and years and years. And then at some point you come back to it and say, we got to come up with something else. How's that not a victory for like the lone writer or the underfunded team or somebody who's not even a writer? You were just thrown something and said, you better make docs for this or you're in trouble. Do what you got to do.
You made a really great point about resourcing. This is a theme that keeps recurring today. Like there isn't always the option to buy. Sometimes you just have to build. If you were given the time and the space to do this without having to worry about ongoing feature releases, how would you solve the tool chain problem now to benefit from the lessons you learned from making your Kraken?
Admittedly, this is a pipe dream, right? And I think this is a pipe dream that anyone who's had to write docs from scratch probably has, but you have that perfect tool chain in mind, right? The one that does the dynamic linking, the one that has this perfect extensible language that everybody can understand, the one that somehow everybody can just figure out by looking at, and it doesn't require pages and pages and documentation and templating engines and external dependencies and hundreds of thousands of plugins to make it work. In my case, if I were to go back, for example, to I might not have started with Sphinx. I probably, knowing what I know now, I probably would have actually started with Hugo and figured out how it worked a little bit better and tried to build around that in the first place, because as it turns out, I had let my biases influence me just a little bit too much. If I had that infinite time, if I had that infinite, or a complete lack of pressure, I probably would have spent more time POCing, proof of concepting other tool chains to actually push them a little bit farther so that I could get to that point of saying, oh, this actually solves the problem adequately within my scope of doability while maintaining some level of sanity for however much sanity we honestly need to get through our day-to-day lives.
So you mentioned that you are a Go shop, so Hugo made sense. Same, by the way. We started with Sphinx and because we were making a product in Python, and then we started making products with Go and eventually moved to Hugo. How important is it a factor when you're considering your tool chain to consider what language your developers are writing in and how much they may or may not have to support you? Like, should that be one of the things that you're thinking about when you're starting a new tool chain?
This does sort of come back into the resourcing side of things, but probably a little bit no, because imagine if you're like a C++ shop, where the hell are you going to go? Yeah, God forbid you're working for some government lab where they're still writing everything in COBOL. Even with Sphinx, it's not like we didn't have Python developers. We actually write our own Python SDK. It was more about, do I have the help I will need when I hit a roadblock? Because again, I'm not a programmer by trade. I'm not a computer engineer by trade. I'm a tinkerer by trade, really. So I can get a certain distance just by tinkering before I have to ask somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. And if I'm lucky, there's someone I work with who's invested in the product getting to a certain state of good, because that person's more likely to come back to me and say, yeah, I can spare a cycle to help you out. This isn't to say that you can't do this 100% to the community, but how many of us have Googled something to find something on Stack Overflow, and it's like the question, 5 years old, no answers. And then what are you going to do? Or there is an answer, but it's like on Reddit, and someone ran one of those scripts that overwrites everything in their history with random garbage. So someone actually did solve it, and then they erased it from history to leave you hanging, drifting in the wind, wishing you had made better decisions in your life.
All right, we have time for one more. So from Matthew, if a tool we're using becomes deprecated, when do we revise our tools and when do we continue with the old methods?
I'll actually put a timeline on this one because deprecated tools are dangerous. Even for a docs team where you may not have the same sort of security concerns that other tools do. Like once something hits that deprecation state where you're not going to get any more updates, or your team is now going to have to hard fork that code and take on the job of keeping it running, because as your OSs progress, as the underlying tool chains progress, Python 2 is gone, right? Python 3 is now the default. There are tools out there you cannot run trivially anymore because It's actual work just to get them to run, because the entire thing from top to bottom has become deprecated. I personally think if you've got tools that are gone, they're deprecated, they're not being maintained, even if they're not being maintained anymore, if you've got plugins where no one's touched it in a year or more, you've got about a year to figure that out. And the longer you wait, the more likely it is you're going to get to a danger point, a panic point, where things start breaking and you can't fix it. I don't think that's worth it. I would much rather, if I know I have stuff in my tool chain that is actually on its way out, start planning to replace it, hard fork it, find some way of getting it out of my tool chain. It's kind of like, at this point, I'm not dealing with a Kraken, now it's a zombie. I don't need that in my life. You probably don't need it in yours either.
All right. With that, we are at time. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful talk.